Hey guys, tonight we're setting out on a journey where the sun scorches your back, the dust cakes your throat, and ice, yes, actual frozen water, is a miracle carefully cradled in ancient mud domes. We're heading straight into the Persian desert where clever minds once found ways to cool desserts in the heat of summer centuries before electricity was even a concept. You're about to walk in their sandals. Fair warning though, you probably won't survive this heat in your Nike slides. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, what city are you listening from and what time is it where you are right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the high desert plateau of what we now call Iran. The sun hangs like a golden hammer overhead, flattening every shadow until it disappears into the sand. Even your thoughts feel like they're sweating. The air tastes of grit and heat, and every footstep is met with the soft crunch of dust that's been sun-baked for centuries. Your sandals, made of rough leather, do little to protect your feet from the furnace-like ground, and you can't help but imagine how miserable this must have been for people who lived here forever. But this is the Persian heartland, and while it may look like a vast nothingness, history whispers from every rock and ridge. The wind carries secrets of kings and conquerors, merchants and masons, especially those who dared to chill water in a world where boiling was the default setting. You pass what once might have been a path, now just a slightly more level line between scraggly bushes, and head toward a cluster of clay-colored buildings in the distance. Their domed roofs shimmer under the sun. At first you think it's a mirage, then slowly, the scene becomes solid, real. These were villages that dotted the land during the Achaemenid Empire, which rose to glory around 550 BCE under Cyrus the Great. Yep, the guy with a name that sounds like a luxury SUV, but who ran one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Even then, life here was never easy. The people weren't lounging in silk all day. Most of them labored under a blazing sky that seemed determined to cook them alive. Farmers coaxed wheat and dates from stubborn soil. Craftsmen shaped bricks from sun-hardened mud, and everyone had one common complaint. It's way too hot. One mainstream fact to set the tone: the ancient Persians were among the earliest civilizations to develop sophisticated methods of storing ice year-round. No, not in fancy fridges. We're talking about literal pits in the ground and towering dome structures made of mud and straw called yakhchals that acted as prehistoric freezers. And guess what? They worked. The twist? These weren't universal luxuries. While the elite nibbled on frozen delicacies during lavish feasts, your average villager got whatever water didn't boil off by noon. That's right. If you weren't born with a fancy last name, or, any last name at all, you were stuck watching other people enjoy their frosty snacks while your goats stared at you like, "You gonna fix this or nah?" As you wander through the ruins of a small village, you spot broken pottery near a dried-up well. It's easy to romanticize ancient life, robes, poetry, astronomical observations, but look closer and you'll find lice, sunburn, and lots of squinting. At night, the cold bites hard. But right now, the heat is a slow, lazy monster that wraps around you like a wet towel from the oven. And yet, in this sweltering misery, people figured out how to make ice and keep it from melting. That's the paradox you're walking into. You follow the dry bed of a former canal where wild herbs, some say they were once used to flavor snow treats, grow defiantly. A lizard darts past, belly low to the earth, smarter than most of us in staying cool. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd's voice echoes, calling to sheep that look like they, too, gave up on sweating centuries ago. This land may look empty, but it pulses with life shaped by the need to endure, adapt, and occasionally to chill out. Literally. A quirky tidbit. Some ancient Persians used crocodile dung mixed with herbs as a form of sun protection. Not exactly Neutrogena, but desperate times call for reptilian measures. Let that sink in while you consider your SPF 50 back home. As you climb a gentle rise, the earth changes texture, smoother, firmer, the foundation of something more deliberate. Walls once stood here, tall and layered in plaster. Historians still argue whether this region had seasonal ice delivery for commoners or if it remained strictly a palace privilege. Some records suggest communal ice pits, others scoff and claim those were just food storage gone moldy. But the truth, like the best kind of dessert, lies somewhere in the middle. You crest the hill. Beyond it, nestled like a fossilized egg, sits a half-buried dome. Your first real yakhchal. Its curved surface rises from the sand like a forgotten spacecraft. No windows, just slits and vents, strategically placed to catch the wind and whisper it down into its cavernous belly. It looks like it could belong in a sci-fi film, but it's older than most major religions. You step closer. The entrance is low, intentionally so. It discourages heat from barging in like an uninvited guest. As you reach out, your fingers brush the outer wall. It's warm, yes, but not scalding. The special mixture of mud, ash, lime, and goat hair, yes, goat hair, works surprisingly well as insulation. And inside? Inside, the real magic happens. But don't go in just yet. You'll want to know how these mud bubbles kept their cool, despite living in a landscape that makes your oven jealous. That comes next. You crouch and duck into the yakhchal, the air shifting noticeably as you enter. It's not cold, not yet, but it is cooler, enough to stir goosebumps across your sun-punished skin. The light dims, replaced by a soft amber glow, leaking in through narrow vents carved at precise angles. Your eyes adjust, slowly taking in the curved interior, high, echoing, like standing inside an enormous clay beehive. The walls spiral up above you, breathing gently with each desert breeze that slips in and winds downward. And now the real marvel begins. The ancient Persians weren't just building fancy domes for aesthetics. They were engineering thermal miracles. The yakhchal's dome shape wasn't random. It was designed to channel warm air upward and away from the ice stored deep inside. Below you lies a sunken pit, often several meters deep, lined with thick, waterproof mortar known as sarouj, a blend of clay, sand, egg whites, goat hair, lime, and ash. Sounds like an awful omelet, but it was shockingly effective. At night, when desert temperatures plummeted, they poured water into shallow pools just outside the yakhchal. The frigid air would freeze the water into sheets of ice, and before the sun rose, laborers would carefully break the ice and haul it into the dome's belly, stacking it layer by layer like prized treasure. But here's the kicker. Thanks to the dome's insulating materials and those clever air vents, the ice could last for months. That's right, months. In the desert, without electricity. Let that float around your overheating brain for a second. A mainstream historical fact: some yakhchals, particularly those in Yazd, date back to at least 400 BCE and were so well constructed that they were still in use in the early 20th century. That means generations of desert dwellers were snacking on cool drinks and sorbets while the rest of the ancient world roasted. And what exactly were they cooling? Well, aside from drinking water, they stored dairy, fruits, herbs, and most tantalizing of all, falude. Imagine thin vermicelli noodles, steeped in rosewater and lime juice, served ice cold. Yes, it sounds odd, and yes, it's delicious. Falude may be the ancient grandparent of modern sorbet, and historians debate whether it was first concocted during the Achaemenid Empire or the later Sassanid dynasty. Either way, It's cold, sweet, and kind of the Beyoncé of Persian desserts. Now let's talk about the labor, because, of course, none of this ice magic happened by itself. You picture a crew of sweaty men in linen tunics, hauling massive blocks of ice on their backs before the morning heat stole their chance. They likely used thick felt blankets and straw to wrap the ice, insulating it with primitive but effective methods. You think your job is tough? Try outrunning the sun every single day with a slab of ice on your shoulder. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts mention that yakhchals were occasionally used as meeting spots for lovers. Cool, private, quiet. Honestly, it's kind of romantic until you remember the goat hair in the walls. You walk along the circular interior, fingertips grazing the rough yet cool surface. Outside, the wind moans across the sand, but in here, it's hushed. You sit down on a flat stone near the edge of the storage pit and imagine life 1,000 years ago. You wouldn't be a tourist. You'd be a builder, an ice hauler, or maybe, if fate was kind, a dessert vendor near the bazaar, passing out chilled drinks in clay cups to red-faced customers gasping from the heat. And those vents you saw outside? They were part of a larger system called badgers, or wind catchers. These ingenious towers acted like ancient air conditioners. They captured even the faintest breeze and funneled it downward, sometimes across underground channels of water called qanats, to cool entire homes. It's a system so advanced that modern engineers still study it with open admiration. Historians still argue whether the concept of the yakhchal spread west into the Roman Empire, or if it remained a distinctively Persian innovation. Some claim that Alexander the Great himself was so impressed by Persian refrigeration that he tried replicating the idea back in Macedonia, though given how often he was busy conquering things, he probably left the blueprint on his war elephant. You lean back and take a deep breath. The air smells of dry clay, with the faintest trace of minerals and maybe even something sweet, left over from the generations who once stored delicacies here. Your imagination does the rest, nobles fanning themselves as servants brought out frosted drinks, children squealing with delight at the sight of winter in a bowl, even as camels sweated just outside. Even the Emperor Darius, who ruled from Persepolis, would have sent servants to ensure his feasts were properly chilled. There's even speculation, though not yet confirmed, that Persia's great rulers had dedicated ice masters whose sole job was managing cold stores and dessert logistics. Now that's a LinkedIn title you don't see every day. A soft rustle interrupts your thoughts. A bird, maybe, taking shelter near the entrance. You glance up, realizing how dark it's grown in here. Outside, the sun is sliding down the sky, throwing long shadows across the desert. The worst of the heat has passed, but the yakhchal will keep cooling long into the night. That's the beauty of it. It works in harmony with the natural world, not against it. You rise slowly, bones cracking from the rest, and make your way back to the entrance. You pause, taking one last look around the ancient ice house, and step out into the fading light. The world feels louder again, warmer. The yakhchal behind you is just one of many, but to you it's become a quiet monument to ingenuity, a place where people didn't just survive the desert. They figured out how to eat like it was winter. Your sandals crunch softly across a gravel path, and the warm wind brushes your cheeks as you follow an old irrigation trench. Dry now, but still etched into the land like a faded wrinkle. This trench once carried water from a qanat, a marvel all its own. Underground channels that stretched for miles, bringing precious water from distant mountains straight into the heart of Persia's cities and villages. Imagine it. A long, dark tunnel carved by hand, angling ever so slightly downhill over dozens of kilometers. You can barely get your phone charger to work right, and these people were carving precision water highways under mountains. No pumps, no electricity, just gravity and grit. You pause near what looks like a collapsed hole in the earth, actually a vertical shaft from the qanat system, one of the many access points used during construction. Workers would climb down on ropes or narrow ladders, digging by hand in the low light. The air was damp and cool down there, occasionally too cool, in fact. There are stories of men who entered healthy and emerged coughing, lightheaded, or never came up again. Some even called the qanats breathing tunnels, not because they helped you breathe, but because they seemed to inhale you if you weren't careful. Mainstream historians agree that the oldest known qanats date back at least 3,000 years, some even earlier. These watery lifelines were essential for cities like Yazd, which exist in one of the driest places on Earth but still managed to thrive for centuries. Without qanats, there'd be no water. And without water, well, you wouldn't be standing here imagining cold desserts. Speaking of which, let's get back to the good stuff. Once water reached the yakhchal complex, it didn't just sit there in open-air pools waiting to be frozen. No, the Persians built shallow, shaded channels, like long stone bathtubs, that optimized freezing by spreading the water thin. Night after night, thin sheets of ice formed, which were then broken up and stacked like stone bricks inside the ice house. But this wasn't a casual morning errand. It required discipline, coordination, and a truly unhealthy obsession with chilled desserts. You picture it vividly. A team of workers bundled up in layered robes, whispering and grunting as they shuffle slabs of ice by moonlight. One guy always complains about his back. Another slips and curses, though probably in a very PG-13 ancient dialect. Someone's younger brother is there just to learn the trade, but mostly he watches and eats dates from a cloth pouch. Classic. Quirky detail alert. The wealthiest Persians sometimes flavored their ice with saffron or powdered dried roses, turning it into an early form of luxury popsicle. And get this, some texts describe using snow from mountaintops, transported down in tightly packed felt and straw by donkey. Those donkeys were basically the UPS trucks of the ancient cold chain. As the stars appear overhead, you realize how much effort it took just to have a little relief from the heat. It wasn't convenience, it was survival. And it became tradition, wrapped in rituals and schedules passed down through generations. There's one structure nearby, low and rectangular, that catches your eye. It's a storage building, mud brick walls, thick and windowless. Inside, it's pitch black and surprisingly cold. These weren't ice houses, but dry cellars for storing sweets, dried herbs, salted yogurt, and, most luxuriously, ice-preserved rosewater puddings. You're not sure what rosewater pudding tastes like, but you're guessing the word bliss wouldn't do it justice. Here's a scholarly debate for the road. Some archaeologists argue that these storage buildings were more important than the yakhchals themselves. Their theory? Ice was valuable not for immediate consumption, but for the preservation of elite goods, delicacies that needed a cool place to last longer. Other historians say that's giving ice too much credit. People wanted cold drinks, they say. It's that simple. As with most history, the truth is likely somewhere in between. You lean against the cool wall, letting your thoughts drift. It's easy to romanticize all this. Ancient Persia, camels crossing the horizon, spiced wind curled through the streets. But don't forget the reality. None of this was easy. Qanats caved in. Ice melted, donkeys got grumpy, and yet, year after year, they rebuilt. They kept refining the system, just for the chance to taste cold sweetness in the middle of a boiling world. You close your eyes for a second and pretend you're one of them. Not a king, not a general, just a young vendor preparing chilled falude under a woven canopy. You press crushed lime into the syrup. You shave the ice by hand. Customers come and go, faces red and happy. Somewhere nearby, music plays softly. Someone laughs. In a harsh, unforgiving land, you've built a moment of comfort, all thanks to a hole in the ground and a dream to beat the heat. When you open your eyes again, the stars have multiplied, dusting the sky with light. You turn and follow the path back toward the domed silhouette of the yakhchal, which now glows faintly in the moonlight. You don't hear the ancient engineers anymore, but somehow you feel them. Their quiet genius is humming beneath your feet. Their voices are frozen in the walls. And somewhere deep inside you, that first chill of midnight desert air settles into your skin, soft, inevitable, like the feeling of slipping into dreams. You move slowly now, as if your limbs are syncing with the measured pulse of the desert night. The dome of the yakhchal looms behind you, its curved silhouette almost blending into the star-drenched sky. But ahead, what's that? Another peculiar structure, partially buried in sand and time. It's shaped like a stairwell to nowhere, descending into the earth at a precise angle. You follow it down. The air cools with each step. The stone underfoot is smooth, worn down by generations of calloused heels. You're entering the ancient Persian equivalent of a walk-in freezer, a subterranean chamber known as an anbar, a water reservoir, but more than that, a climate-controlled haven tucked beneath the earth. These things were architectural poems, designed with painstaking attention to airflow, insulation, and storage. By the time you reach the bottom, your skin is prickling. It's at least 10 degrees cooler here. Not bad for a civilization with zero access to Freon. The Persians were masters of passive cooling. They didn't just rely on shadow and stone, they recruited the wind, literally. Above this reservoir once stood a tall, slatted tower, a badger, or wind catcher. Sounds romantic, doesn't it? Like something a moody bard would write about, but it was brutally functional. Here's how it worked. The badger tower caught desert wind and funneled it downward, creating a natural convection system. Warm air was pulled out and cooler air pushed in. Combined with thick insulation and evaporative techniques, the temperature inside could drop by more than 20 degrees Celsius. That's the ancient equivalent of having a really, really good HVAC guy on call. Mainstream historical records suggest that cities like Yazd, Kerman, and Kashan were dotted with these structures. Wealthy families even had their own personal cooling towers. Because why suffer with the peasants when your house could have breeze on demand? Your hand brushes against the stone wall, still faintly damp from the moisture that collects here in the cool. You think about the young apprentices who maintained these systems, waking early to check the vents, brushing sand from the intake slats, shooing away the occasional opportunistic snake that thought the anbar was a spa retreat. And speaking of wildlife, one fringe theory, yes, an actual academic argument, suggests that some yakhchals were briefly converted into silos or animal shelters during times of war or drought. According to one obscure Persian tale, a flock of royal pigeons was once stored in a yakhchal to keep them cool. Feathery VIPs, if you will. Most historians scoff at this, of course, but a few say, well, maybe. There's something hypnotic about this space. You sit on a cool stone ledge, back pressed to the wall, and let your breath slow. The silence here isn't empty. It's full, thick with the murmurs of forgotten workers and desert breezes. You picture the families who came here to draw water, the engineers who bragged about how efficiently they caught the wind, the vendors who dipped pails into reservoirs to chill sweet syrups for market day. It's funny how often history is described as grand battles or royal drama, but here, in the dark belly of a forgotten fridge, you find something more intimate, a quieter type of triumph. They weren't trying to conquer the world, just the heat. A dry creak interrupts your thoughts. It's the wooden door at the top of the stairwell, gently swinging in the wind. You smile. Even the architecture is trying to keep the airflow just right. You decide to climb back up, not because you're done, but because there's more to see. As you emerge into the open night again, your eyes adjust to the moonlight and catch a glimmer in the distance. Another dome, but smaller, flattened at the top and coated with a thick glaze of ancient stucco. You head toward it, crunching over gravel and scattered pottery shards. This, as it turns out, is the private yakhchal of a long-forgotten noble family. The entrance is framed with worn carvings, elegant swirls and motifs that once shouted wealth, but now only whisper nostalgia. Inside, it's colder than you expect. Remarkably so. You'd swear someone left the AC on. Scholars are still divided on just how low the temperatures in these domes could go. Some say a few degrees above freezing. Others argue that, in perfect conditions, ice could remain solid through the entire summer. A few cheeky researchers have even tried to replicate the process, with mixed results and a lot of spilled slush. But here's the real kicker. These structures weren't isolated. They were nodes in a network. A smart, low-tech infrastructure spread across villages and towns, coordinated to store, transport, and utilize cold in the same way we use electricity. You weren't just chilling dessert. You were participating in a civilization-wide ballet of thermodynamics. The wind shifts, tugging gently at your sleeves, and you realize something else. These spaces weren't just physical. They were cultural, sacred even, built with mathematical precision, often aligned with stars or seasonal markers. One historian even claimed the domes resonated at certain frequencies, creating subtle, humming harmonies in the quietest hours of the night. Probably nonsense, but still, you kind of want to believe it. You take one last look around the dome, the chipped walls, the polished floor, a single shard of glazed pottery lying in the corner, turquoise blue, the color of Persian dreams. And as you step outside again, the stars seem brighter than before, cooler even. Like they too remember the days when people beat the desert not with machines, but with cleverness, patience, and the sheer will to stay just a little more comfortable. You continue through the sands, your steps slow and crunching softly over pebbled desert soil. The air hums quietly with the warmth that still lingers after sunset. Just ahead, nestled between eroded brick remnants and sun-scorched shrubs, stands what remains of a storage facility. Not grand, not ornate, just functional. But that's the point. Because now you're about to understand how the Persians didn't just build cold storage. They built cold supply chains. You brush aside a tumbleweed, yes, a literal tumbleweed, because history has a sense of humor, and step into a low stone structure partially sunk into the ground. It's empty now, except for a few pieces of broken ceramic, a faintly sour scent of dust, and what appears to be a groove in the stone floor. It curves gently, almost like a track. This was once a transport path used for rolling clay jars filled with ice, syrup, or even delicate fruits chilled in the yakhchal and prepped for delivery. You're standing in the Persian version of a cold logistics hub, where preserved goods were carefully packed in straw, loaded onto donkeys or carts, and moved across miles of harsh terrain. And yes, you're thinking exactly what I'm thinking. How on earth did they keep things cold en route through a furnace of sand? Well, that's where it gets clever. The goods weren't just packed in straw, they were sealed in layered containers, terracotta within wood sometimes lined with wax or sheep's wool, and transported during the dead of night. Couriers would often follow kanat paths, sticking close to underground water channels where the ground was cooler. Some even built way stations, mini pits shaded with palm fronds, to keep goods from melting en route. The idea of ancient overnight delivery sounds funny until you realize that a noble in Persepolis could send chilled mulberry syrup to a cousin in Shiraz. It might arrive in a slightly slushy state, but it did. There are records, dusty scrolls and scratched stone tablets, mentioning temperature-sensitive gifts, including preserved jellies and snow-cooled sherbets. A handwritten note from one official to another even jokes about a batch of melted dignity when his ice shipment arrived half defrosted. Historians generally agree that these systems were reliable but limited. Only the wealthy had regular access to cold desserts in summer. But there are debates, of course there are. Some argue that certain villages pooled resources to share access to ice and chilled goods during festivals. There's even speculation that Zoroastrian temples offered cold water as a form of divine blessing on certain holy days. True? Hard to say. but you can almost hear the splash of ladles in earthen cups, handed reverently from priest to pilgrim. In one bizarre footnote, a 19th century traveler wrote of seeing ice coins used in a local market, frozen discs of water traded briefly as tokens before melting away in the buyer's pouch. No one's been able to confirm it. But the idea of money that vanishes before you can spend it, honestly, doesn't sound so different from your paycheck. Back in the ruined storage hut, you crouch near a pile of broken clay, possibly remnants of storage jars. One piece bears a faded stamp, maybe a merchant symbol. You imagine him now, short beard, sun-darkened skin, hunched over books and wax seals, tracking temperature-sensitive shipments like some ancient logistics manager with heat stroke. Maybe he worried about spoilage. Maybe he cussed when a mule threw a load. Some things never change. There's a forgotten science in these ruins. Not flashy, not explosive, just quietly brilliant. A mix of architecture, meteorology, and good old-fashioned patience. The kind of brilliance that doesn't show up in movies but holds civilizations together. You lean against the cool wall, suddenly feeling like you're part of something orderly. Like even chaos had a schedule. A lizard skitters past your boot and vanishes into the stonework. Somewhere nearby, the desert wind stirs the door of another chamber, creaking it open with a sound that might as well be a sigh. You step back out under the open sky. The wind picks up, dry and laced with the scent of ancient mortar. Off in the distance, past another low hill, you spot another dome silhouette. Not a yakhchal this time. No, this one is flatter, with tiny holes patterned across the top. You already know what it is. A dovecote. Yes, a birdhouse, but not just any birdhouse. This was a critical part of the supply chain, because where there's ice and fruit and syrup, there will inevitably be pigeons. The Persians, ever practical, used pigeons for food, fertilizer, and, crucially, messaging. These dovecotes were like ancient dispatch centers. Messengers could send word between storage sites, market stalls, and homes to coordinate deliveries. A chef preparing a royal banquet might release a pigeon to request more chilled yogurt. A merchant halfway across the region could confirm a shipment had arrived, slightly soggy perhaps, but intact. And here's a detail to make your inner logistics nerd swoon. Some larger dovecotes had interior spiral ramps so caretakers could gather droppings for fertilizer without disturbing the birds. Efficiency, baby. Still, historians can't agree on just how widespread these bird-based networks were. Some suggest they were mostly ceremonial or limited to temples. Others argue for vast avian infrastructure stretching from Iran to the Indus. No one's cracked the full map yet. But doesn't it make you smile picturing flocks of birds zipping through the desert sky, their tiny wings flapping urgently to deliver a message that simply reads, "Send more cherry ice." You pause there, standing between the dome and the dovecote. The stars wheel slowly above you. The wind cools your face, and for a moment it all connects. Wind catchers humming, qanats gurgling below, pigeons fluttering overhead, and couriers darting through the shadows with precious frozen treats. A desert society that, against all odds, figured out how to chill. You keep walking, tracing the worn footpath now softened by sand and time. The stars above feel closer tonight, almost like they're watching you. Or maybe that's just your brain getting loopy from the gentle rhythm of history. Either way, you've arrived at something important, because now it's time to see how they made all this possible in the first place. You step down into a shallow basin. The earth is cracked, dry, and pale, almost chalky under your feet. This isn't a ruin. This is a raw landscape. You're standing on the edge of a natural ice harvesting site, where Persians would patiently wait through the freezing desert nights to gather ice. It's the part of the cold chain that doesn't get enough credit, the silent, tedious, nightly grind. Because despite all the architectural genius of the yakhchal and the intricate delivery system, It all started right here, with shallow water, with cold air, and with someone watching over it like a hawk. Imagine yourself there, hunched under a rough wool cloak, breath clouding the night air, checking the ice pans for that telltale sheen. It might surprise you, but the Persian plateau can get seriously cold at night, especially in the arid highlands. We're talking sub-zero Celsius in winter months, perfect for turning shallow pools into sheets of ice. Farmers would dig rows of trenches or flat beds lined with clay, then flood them in the late afternoon. Overnight, as the mercury dipped, the water would freeze into thin, manageable layers. Come morning, workers, often bundled boys with stiff fingers, would break up the ice and carry it carefully to the yakhchals. It's not glamorous, no magic, just repetition, night after night, freeze, crack, haul, like running an eternal lemonade stand. Except you never drink the lemonade and it might give you frostbite. But here's where it gets oddly satisfying. They optimize the process down to the angle of the pools. A slight tilt here, a windbreak there, adjustments made from centuries of observation. And these were communal efforts. Entire villages sometimes pitched in. People set schedules, shared tools, gossiped quietly under the moonlight while waiting for the frost to form. One dusty folk tale even claims that newlyweds had to spend their first night harvesting ice as a sort of rite of passage. Is it true? Historians can't decide. Maybe it was romantic. Maybe it was cold, wet misery. Probably both, but it makes you smile either way. There's also debate about how much ice they could actually store. Some say enough to last into summer. Others believe it melted far earlier, with only wealthy estates keeping supplies year-round. There's archaeological evidence of springtime ice use, but not enough to draw a full picture. It's one of those scholarly gray zones. Plenty of data, not quite enough certainty. Still, the fact remains. Ice wasn't rare. It was planned. It worked for, and it became an expectation in certain parts of Persian life, especially among the elite. You imagine being one of those workers now. The night is still, almost too quiet. A breeze rustles the acacia trees nearby, and the ice pans reflect the starlight like fragile silver trays. You squat beside one, tap the surface, solid. You nod to your companion. It's time. With slow, practiced movements, you and a few others begin lifting the ice into thick cloths. Each layer is fragile, no thicker than a book cover. You stack them carefully in a cart, wrapped in hay, bound with rope. No time to waste. The sun will rise soon, and that means melt. You haul the load uphill to the waiting dome of the yakhchal, where the cool, dry air welcomes it like a sleeping bag, welcomes frozen toes. Oh, and here's the quirky bit no one tells you in textbooks. Some villagers believed that the ice held desert dreams. Whatever images or thoughts passed through the night would somehow freeze into the water and stay there. Children whispered stories into the pans. Elders murmured wishes. And when the ice was served in summer, people believed they could taste the memory. You've got to admit, that's poetic. And also deeply weird. But in the best way. You leave the basin behind, now glowing faintly under a sleepy moon. Another figure approaches in the distance, a lone rider perhaps, or a night messenger. You can't be sure, but something about the way the horse's hooves strike the earth reminds you. Time was always ticking, always melting. Because even then, even in a world without power grids or refrigeration coils, people understood that cold was a resource. Fleeting, fragile, precious, and they treated it like gold, maybe even better than gold, because you can't drink gold on a hot day. Now there's one more piece to this frosty puzzle, and it's coming up over the next hill. You take one last look at the ice pans behind you, then start walking again. The path rises gently, the air gets thinner, and the stars lean in closer. What's waiting ahead? Let's just say it's about to get a little sweet. You feel the incline beneath your feet as the terrain rises gently, the sand crunching softly underfoot. The desert is quiet now, the hush of night holding everything in place. Just ahead, the faint smell of something sweet teases your senses, a strange contrast to the arid earth. No, it's not your imagination. You're getting close to the real reason this entire ice operation existed. Dessert, Persian style. It's time for the payoff, the end goal of all that yakhchal hauling and late-night ice farming. Because if you thought all this effort was just for drinking water, you clearly underestimated the ancient Persian sweet tooth. Welcome to the world of Faludi. You arrive at a low, square building, not grand, not decorated, but inside, something magical is happening. A man with a weathered face and saffron-stained fingers is stirring a large copper bowl. Thin, translucent noodles twirl through syrup that glistens in the lamplight. Beside him sits a chunk of fresh ice, already melting slowly in the heat. He carves off a piece with a practiced flick, drops it into the mix, and offers you a taste. It's cold, like actual cold, and sweet. Rose water, lime, a hint of something floral and strange. You try not to let your eyes roll back in delight. It's the kind of thing that would have broken TikTok if TikTok had existed 20,500 years ago. Faludi, for the uninitiated, is one of the oldest frozen desserts in the world. Made from vermicelli-like starch noodles, often mung bean or cornstarch, it's mixed with a syrupy base of sugar and rose water, sometimes finished with a squeeze of lime juice. But the kicker? It had to be served chilled, not just left in a cellar chilled, icebox chilled, and that meant yakhchal ice. You start to see the picture now. This wasn't about luxury, it was about mastery. In a place where temperatures routinely flirted with 100-degree Fs during the day, they figured out how to reliably serve cold desserts, not by accident, not by luck, but with infrastructure. Faludi wasn't just dessert, it was proof of human stubbornness, of innovation wrapped in sugar. And yes, it was also delicious. You imagine ancient nobles lounging in shaded courtyards, sipping on ice-cold rose syrup, fanning themselves lazily while servants fetched another bowl. You imagine kids sneaking leftover ice chips, giggling behind the yakhchal. And for those wondering, no, they didn't use vanilla or chocolate. Those weren't options yet. Instead, ancient Persian sweets relied on native flavors: rosewater, saffron, sour cherries, and pistachios. There's even mention in some records of adding basil seeds for texture. Yes, those same seeds that now trend in chia drinks. Nothing is ever really new, is it? Oh, and here's a quirky footnote. Some royal kitchens supposedly had ice sommeliers, basically guys whose whole job was to taste the dessert and decide if the ice was clean enough. Is that exaggerated? Maybe. But historians still argue whether ice used for food came from specific clean pans, separated from those used for cooling jugs or meat storage. Sanitation, it turns out, has always been a bit of a gray area. In fact, while we're on the topic, not everyone agreed that ice was a good thing. Some ancient physicians warned that cold foods could upset the humors. Others believed they calmed the spirit. You'd probably nod off reading their debates, but they mattered. Because when cold treats became medicine, well, that's when things got serious. A few texts describe ice being crushed, then mixed with herbs or pomegranate juice to treat fevers. Some even claim certain physicians prescribed iced drinks for melancholy. That's right, ancient Persian ice therapy. And here you thought the wellness industry was modern. You sit now, Faludi melting slowly in your hand, and listen to the quiet hum of wind outside. The copper bowl is being refilled. Another servant chips at the ice block, careful not to waste a shard. Every flake of frozen water is precious, earned, carried by hand from the desert's edge, and now it melts into syrup and noodles, vanishing on your tongue like a whispered story. There's something weirdly grounding about this moment. You're eating something that hasn't really changed in over 2 millennia. Something crafted from infrastructure, patience, weather patterns, and wild determination. No machines, no freezers, just human will and a good understanding of thermodynamics. And maybe that's the real message buried in this cold, sweet story. That pleasure doesn't always come easy. That sometimes, to eat dessert in the desert, you've got to outwit the sun. As the night deepens, your thoughts drift. You wonder what else they could have used the ice for. Were there other desserts? Secret recipes lost to time? Was there an elite ice delivery club? Ancient Uber Eats, but with camels and panic about melting cargo? We may never know. There are gaps in the records, missing scrolls, whole dynasties that left barely a smudge. But the taste lingers. You set the empty bowl aside, your fingers sticky with syrup and thyme. Outside, the first hint of dawn paints the horizon, and the yakhchal's dome gleams faintly in the distance, its belly full of frozen history. And just ahead, a market stirs, trade routes hum to life. The real logistics of ancient refrigeration, ice delivery, road dangers, rivalries are waiting. But for now, just let that last spoonful melt slowly on your tongue. The warmth of the sun gently stirs your senses, but you're not quite ready to leave the cool comfort of the Persian desert night just yet. The thoughts of ancient desserts, delicate ice, and rosewater linger like a dream. But now, it's time to pull back a bit, to understand how the incredible ingenuity of this civilization shaped more than just desserts. Let's take a step further back into the bigger picture and see what this intricate ice-making system meant to the larger Persian world. You're still walking along that dusty path, the horizon stretching wide before you. Imagine you're a merchant hauling your goods from the highlands to the bustling markets of ancient Persia. You're not just hauling spices or silk, though. No, you're transporting ice. That's right, ice. And you'd better take care of it. Because in a world that feels like it's always on the verge of suffocating heat, this commodity is more precious than gold. When you think about ancient civilizations, ice isn't usually the first thing that comes to mind, is it? Maybe it should be, though. The Persians weren't the only ones working with ice, but they might have been among the most creative. For centuries, they found ways to manipulate this element, turning it from a frozen inconvenience into something that could change the course of entire empires. This was no simple survival tactic. This was about shaping the very way their society functioned. Let's rewind and take a closer look at the logistics. Those yakhchals were everywhere, not just in the cities or the high courts. They were out in the middle of nowhere, too. These ice houses were vital for anyone who lived in the harsh desert regions, far from the coast, where the temperature could swing wildly from scorching heat by day to chilly coolness by night. But the ice itself didn't just come from anywhere. No, these early ice harvesters didn't simply wait for winter's touch. Instead, they relied on the natural freeze of water flowing through underground channels, a process that required both patience and advanced knowledge of geology. Aqueducts would divert water from distant rivers to underground basins, which they cleverly designed to freeze faster, thanks to the insulation provided by the yakhchal's thick walls. This wasn't just trial and error. It was a precise balance between geography, temperature, and the relentless human drive for innovation. Historians still argue about whether the ice came from frozen rivers or if it was harvested from the dew collected in desert caves. Some suggest that the ice was stored in the yakhchals during the colder months and then used during the scorching summers for cooling and preserving food. And believe it or not, this ice wasn't just a luxury. It was a necessity for keeping food fresh in a time when refrigeration didn't exist. Perishable goods like fish, meat, and dairy were reliant on ice for preservation. It seems hard to imagine, doesn't it? The ancient Persians were living in what was, by today's standards, a brutally hot environment. But they weren't just enduring it. They were taming it. They didn't just hide from the desert sun. They harnessed the very thing that could threaten them, turning it into something as sweet as the falude you tasted earlier. Let's take another leap. Imagine yourself as a high-ranking noble. You've been invited to a banquet in one of those grand, cool courtyards. The atmosphere is luxurious, filled with fragrant spices and music, but also the ice. It's not just there to chill the drinks. It's a symbol of your status. Only those with enough power and wealth could afford the luxury of having ice imported from faraway places, carried for miles to be stored in your private yakhchal. The aristocracy had their own private ice houses, their own ice delivery systems. It wasn't just about preserving food, it was about prestige. The rich were living in a world where even the most basic human needs were turned into an art. What's remarkable is how ordinary this practice might have seemed to those who lived it. No one thought twice about the ice. It was simply part of daily life, like bread, like wine. In the grand halls, amidst the banquets and celebrations, you'd see bowls of chilled sweets and preserved fruits, all served with the same reverence as the most delicate wines. Ice, in this context, was woven seamlessly into the fabric of culture. And don't think for a second that it was just the wealthy who benefited from these ice houses. Ancient Persia was a society of vast complexity, with a delicate balance between the elite and the everyday. Farmers, merchants, and even soldiers were reliant on ice for basic survival. In fact, one of the most profound effects of this ice trade was how it contributed to the efficiency of the Persian economy. Without ice, it's unlikely that such large-scale trade could have flourished across such a vast empire. Traders could now travel greater distances, their goods preserved by the ice carried with them, goods that would make their way from the Persian heartland all the way to the Mediterranean and beyond. What's more, ancient ice wasn't limited to food preservation. It was also used in medicine. Early medical practitioners had the foresight to realize that cold could numb pain, treat fevers, and even ease swelling. Ice in ancient Persia was an essential part of both daily life and medical care. The innovative use of this seemingly simple element revolutionized the way people survived and thrived in such an unforgiving environment. You step back and look at the vastness of what you've learned. All that ingenuity, all that effort poured into creating a new form of life in the harshest conditions. You find yourself wandering further down the ancient paths, wondering what else could possibly be waiting for you in this landscape of forgotten technologies and forgotten sweetness. The sun climbs higher now, the heat of the desert beginning to press in again. But in this world, ice is more than just water frozen in time. It's evidence of the power of human perseverance, and a reminder of how the pursuit of comfort and convenience will forever drive us to innovate in ways we never thought possible. The sun is glaring now, high overhead, casting sharp shadows across the sand. But you, still wandering that quiet path through time, barely notice. You're deep in thought, still mulling over how something as simple as frozen water shaped the heartbeat of a civilization. But let's move closer to the craftsmen behind all this icy wonder. Because it's one thing to dream up a solution to the desert's unrelenting heat, and another to physically build it. So now, let's get our hands dusty and see how these ancient engineers actually constructed those giant conical yakhchals. First, you need a crew, not of laborers in neon vests and hard hats, but men in loose robes, turbans, and with tools made of bronze and bone. These weren't slapdash operations. These structures were architectural marvels. Imagine mixing mud with goat hair and ash to make sarouj, a waterproof plaster so effective that modern scientists still admire its durability. Sarouj wasn't just waterproof, it was life-proof. Able to withstand centuries of wind, sun, earthquakes, and time itself. The workers would shape it layer by layer over a skeleton of wooden scaffolding, carefully smoothing every curve, every surface. No power tools, no blueprints, just skill passed down through generations and a stunning sense of symmetry. You watch as they lay bricks in a perfect spiral, inching skyward. These were no ordinary bricks either. Baked in kilns, cooled in shadow, each one made to fit the curve of the dome. 1,000 of them, maybe more, all placed with quiet, calculated precision. Now picture the foundation. A yakhchal wasn't just plopped down on the nearest patch of sand. Engineers scouted the location carefully, north-facing for the least sun exposure, built in shallow depressions to trap cool air, and sometimes dug with underground chambers that led to qanats, those silent water veins you remember from earlier. These channels not only delivered the water, but also helped regulate the temperature inside, and then the inner sanctum, the ice chamber itself. The space was hollow, sometimes plunging several meters deep, like a reverse tower built into the earth. This was the heart of the operation. Ice blocks would be carefully stacked inside, separated by layers of straw or reeds to reduce melting. And above it all, that tall, elegant cone, narrowing as it reached toward the sky, working like an ancient refrigerator chimney. Here's the best part: ventilation. Yes, they had airflow figured out too. Small vents at the top of the dome allowed warm air to rise and escape while drawing cooler air down into the chamber. It's the same principle you see in modern architecture, only here it's done with mud and instinct. No computers, just observation, repetition, and a whole lot of patience. Historians still argue about whether these domes were purely functional or if there was also a spiritual significance in their shape. Some suggest the pointed tops mirrored sacred Zoroastrian fire temples. Others say it was simply the most efficient way to minimize heat gain. Either way, when you stand beneath one, yes, some still exist, you can feel the stillness. The temperature drops instantly. It's like the desert has stepped aside to let you breathe. As you explore deeper into this architectural feat, you stumble upon something unexpected: graffiti. Ancient names scratched faintly into the inner walls, not elaborate or decorative, just simple marks. Farid, Mehri, maybe Ali. These weren't kings or priests. These were builders, merchants, and laborers. Ordinary people leave a trace of themselves inside the cold womb of ingenuity. And now, one of those quirky facts you'd never expect. Apparently, some yakhchals doubled as tombs. That's right, ice house/burial chamber. Archaeologists have found bones tucked in beneath layers of old straw and shattered ceramic, suggesting that for some, these cool sanctuaries also served as resting places. Makes sense, strangely. What better place to preserve a body than in a structure built to keep death and rot at bay? The strange poetry of that thought stays with you as you continue wandering. You pass a group of goats lazing in the shade of a crumbling yakhchal, their bells tinkling softly. A boy runs by with a clay pot of water balanced on his head, and in the distance you can see a woman hanging linen to dry on the flat roof of a nearby mud house. Life, frozen and fluid at once. One more historical thread to tug. The influence of Persian yakhchal design didn't stay in Persia. These ice houses inspired similar structures in parts of India, Central Asia, and even influenced early European attempts at passive refrigeration. The basic principle, build down, shade from sun, allow air to flow, has traveled across centuries and continents. And here you are, retracing that cooling legacy. You pause now at the base of a surviving yakhchal, half buried in sand. Its once proud cone is chipped, the mud darkened by age, but it's still standing. You place your hand on the side, and the wall is cool, still. After all this time, you marvel at the timelessness of it all. The sweat, the skill, the science wrapped up in one massive mud sculpture. And you realize something oddly comforting. People thousands of years ago were just like you. They got hot, they wanted relief, and they figured it out with nothing more than dirt, water, and a clever mind. As you walk on, the wind picks up again, a hot breeze that dances around the yakhchal and whistles softly through its upper vent. It's like the ancient structure is sighing, a breath from another era, and so you continue, the desert sun warm on your back, the memory of cold still clinging to your fingertips. Your journey carries you beyond the towering yakhchals now, following the winding lifelines of ancient Persia's frozen ambitions. You're still in the desert, still brushing sand from your sleeves, but your mind is now shifting toward the bigger picture. Because if building these ice houses was brilliant, what made them work was logistics. How did they get the ice in there, and who managed the whole frosty operation? You trudge a little further, eyes squinting against the low light of an imagined dusk, and imagine the scene. A caravan of workers trudging through the quiet night, hauling blocks of ice wrapped in thick straw or layers of wool. That's right, ice was often harvested at night, when temperatures dipped below freezing. Persian winters weren't Arctic, but in many regions, nights could grow cold enough to freeze water left out in shallow channels or carved basins. You step closer to one of these ancient ice pits now. Imagine a long rectangular trench, shaded all day, positioned to receive the night's chill. Water flows in and rests there, still as a mirror under the stars. By morning, there's a crust of ice thick enough to be cracked and carefully lifted, piece by glistening piece. And just like that, nature has played her part. Then came the hauling. Teams of men and mules would gently transport the precious cargo into the belly of the yakhchal. They used leather slings and wooden sleds, no trucks, no refrigeration units, just calloused hands and night air. And these weren't ad hoc operations. Persian ice logistics were overseen by appointed officials, managers who coordinated water delivery, freezing schedules, and storage inventory. It was a system. Some scholars even liken them to early cold chain supply managers, which is a fancy way of saying they knew how to keep things cool before the fridge was a thing. Historians still debate the exact size of these networks. Were there ice routes, regular delivery cycles? Some believe entire villages functioned around the ice economy. Others argue that it was more sporadic. Only elite households and temples had regular access to stored ice. But the fact that ice was used to cool food, preserve medicines, and treat the sick shows how essential it became. You start to get a clearer picture now. A network of human effort wrapped around a silent process. From the first water poured into the freezing trench to the final ice chip melting in someone's bowl of saffron dessert, every step was deliberate. Speaking of dessert, here's a particularly sweet fringe tidbit. One favorite icy treat of the Achaemenid nobility was called faluda, a kind of frozen sorbet made from thin vermicelli noodles, rose water, lime juice, and sugar, chilled inside the yakhchal until slushy. Think of it as the ancient Persian version of a Slurpee, except it tasted like poetry. Imagine slurping that down while lounging on embroidered cushions, the scent of jasmine wafting by. You glance over now and picture it. Long-bearded nobles reclining in the shadow of a marble colonnade, sipping chilled rose water and murmuring verses by candlelight. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, a sweaty team of workers is unloading another load of ice under the moonlight, swatting flies and muttering about their backs. That quiet contrast, the elegance of the final product and the laborious journey to get there, is what makes this story quietly extraordinary. Ancient Persia didn't just have ice, they organized for it. They planned it, harvested it, and guarded it like treasure. And they didn't stop there. You start to notice how many aspects of daily life were cooled by design. Clay jugs buried in the ground kept milk and water fresh. Double-walled pottery, called zir, lets air flow between layers to naturally chill liquids. You even find that some homes had early versions of evaporative cooling, damp cloths stretched across windows to create a breeze-cooled interior. At this point, your modern brain might be having a moment of envy. Your AC runs on fossil fuels and a prayer. These folks, they use dirt, wind, and water. Quiet, cheap, sustainable. Now here's something unexpected. In some desert cities, the people used winter snow, not just ice, to store for future use. In the higher elevations near the Zagros Mountains, workers would trek up, harvest snow, and pack it tightly into bundles. This was brought down and stored in underground pits, insulated with sawdust or charcoal. This snowy stash could last well into summer. Imagine that. Snowball fights in July, in Iran. You walk on and pass an old crumbling caravanserai. Inside, merchants once cooled their figs and dates by burying them in sand or placing them beside the cold walls of a nearby yakhchal. Horses and camels would have rested in the shade while their riders sipped something delightfully chilled. The desert might not seem like the place for luxury, but when you plan well, really well, it can be a palace of small comforts. And here's a tiny curiosity. One traveler in the 17th century wrote that in certain regions, guards were posted near ice houses to prevent villagers from sneaking in and stealing ice during heat waves. Not gold, not wine. Ice. There's something strangely charming about that. A reminder that sometimes what people value most isn't what's rare, but what brings relief. Comfort. Sleep. A brief escape from the unbearable. And speaking of sleep, the horizon is darkening now. The desert wind has calmed and the sand is starting to feel cooler beneath your feet. You find yourself standing at the edge of another yakhchal, this one mostly collapsed, its interior exposed like a broken egg. But even in ruins, the temperature inside is noticeably lower. You lean against the cracked wall and let the chill pass through you. Funny, isn't it? A civilization so ancient, and yet their understanding of thermodynamics could still teach modern engineers a thing or two. No electricity, no plastics, just dirt, timing, and an enduring respect for the rhythms of nature. You close your eyes and imagine a bowl of falude in your hands, the faint crunch of slush between your teeth, the scent of roses in the air. Somewhere far away, someone is still keeping the ice, still preserving something delicate in the harshness of the desert. And you, in this slow, unraveling dream, feel that comfort sink a little deeper into your bones. You linger in the hush of that broken yakhchal a bit longer. The air inside is whisper cold, like someone left a window open to the past. But eventually, the desert nudges you forward, as deserts do. Not with a shove, but with a slowly rising warmth that reminds you nothing stays still forever. You move on. This time, your thoughts turn not just to the engineering, but to the people, the forgotten hands behind the innovation. Because let's face it, yakhchals didn't build themselves. And while Persian nobles may have sipped their chilled rosewater under silk canopies, someone else was down in the mud, stacking bricks and mixing that mysterious insulating plaster. Imagine them now. A crew of laborers, shirtless in the sun, clay smeared across their arms, voices raised in rhythm as they pass up buckets of sarouj. That was the secret mix, by the way. Clay, sand, goat hair, egg whites, lime, and ash. Sounds like a failed baking experiment, right? But this mixture was waterproof and breathable and resisted heat better than many modern materials. Sarouj was the unsung hero of Persian cooling, and they worked with it beautifully. The walls of the yakhchal weren't just thick, they were angled for perfection. Sloped at just the right degree to reflect heat and withstand wind, they often took weeks to shape. It wasn't guesswork. These builders understood geometry, thermal mass, and airflow. You picture one of them stepping back to squint at the slope, then adjusting a single brick by an inch. because even a slight misalignment could mean more meltwater comes in July. Historians still argue whether the knowledge was formalized in guilds or passed down orally among families. Some inscriptions suggest state sponsorship, meaning the empire paid for and protected these builders. Others point to more grassroots efforts, especially in smaller towns. Either way, their knowledge was deep. These people weren't improvising. They were executing a plan drawn from centuries of inherited wisdom. And speaking of plans, take a detour now toward the edge of a ruined village. You notice something. The layout. Streets that funnel wind just so. Canals run beneath shaded pathways. And yakhchals, more than one, are planted at key locations like cool anchors holding the community together. The role of these structures was bigger than just preserving dessert. They were civic features, strategic assets. In times of famine or extreme heat, they offered the only real relief. A bit of cool water could prevent sunstroke, icy compresses could soothe a fever, and yes, every now and then, a child might sneak in just to press their cheek against the blessedly cold floor. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some ancient Persian midwives used chunks of stored ice during childbirth to cool cloths or reduce swelling. Ice, in that sense, was medicine. A quiet miracle. You walk now alongside a long-forgotten irrigation channel. It's cracked and dry, but you can picture the water running through it, feeding the freezing trenches or keeping the sarouj bricks moist during construction. These channels, qanats, were another Persian marvel. Built underground, they tapped mountain aquifers and carried water across miles without pumps. No electricity, no modern tools, just gravity and good math. Pause here. Let your hand drift along the wall of a dry qanat shaft. The stone is cool, still doing its job centuries later, still guarding a flow that no longer flows. Back above ground, imagine a bustling construction scene. Overseers with long beards and parchment scrolls, apprentices carrying tools, women bringing pitchers of water, maybe even offering advice on the mix. Because you can bet this knowledge wasn't entirely gendered. It rarely is, despite how history tries to write it. And then, humor me here, imagine a young laborer slipping on a wet brick and landing in a pile of goat hair plaster. It smells awful. Everyone laughs. Even the overseer cracks a smile. It's a brief break in a long, hot day. These people weren't just laboring, they were living, joking, sneaking bites of bread, arguing over whose wall had a better slope. One story passed down in desert towns speaks of a builder who left his thumbprint on the interior wall of a yakhchal on purpose, a kind of signature. No one knows his name, but his mark remains, curled in baked plaster like a fossil of a moment. You leave that idea behind, walking past where that print might have been. The path grows darker. The desert has softened into evening again, and you start to think about what it means to build something that keeps giving. These yakhchals, they weren't just about summer ice. They were acts of long-term generosity. Someone built them knowing the real payoff might come years later, for someone else entirely. There's a kind of beauty in that. Your feet crunch on loose gravel, and the sound echoes slightly. You're near another collapsed dome. Inside, the temperature drops several degrees. Even in ruin, the earth remembers how to cool itself. That's the magic of passive design. Nothing fancy, just the right materials in the right shape, used in the right place. You lean against the wall. It's smooth with age, but still textured. There's that faint scent again, dust and lime and something oddly sweet, like old earth that's seen kindness. There's a philosophical core to all this. These structures didn't conquer the desert. They harmonized with it. They didn't try to outpower the heat with force. They flowed around it, cooled by the shadow, preserved by patience. That's something your modern world sometimes forgets. And here's the last image to hold as this section winds down. A quiet courtyard. The sky above is violet. A breeze stirs the leaves of a fig tree. Somewhere nearby, a family opens the yakhchal door and pulls out a block of ice. The father chips a corner free and passes it to his daughter. She presses it to her cheek. Her eyes go wide with surprise. Then, delight. She laughs. The sound rings out across the dusk. That laugh, that's the point of all of this. You step out of that dim, cool ruin and feel the warmth wrap around you again. Not oppressive now, more like a blanket left in the sun. The kind of heat you respect because you've just seen what it takes to beat it. But let's follow this thread further. You've walked the canals, stood inside the domes, and met the builders in your mind. Now it's time to turn toward the food, the sweet, delicate soul of this entire enterprise. Because what were these yakhchals protecting? Not just ice, but pleasure. And in a desert empire, pleasure took the form of chilled desserts, aromatic syrups, and icy drinks poured into copper cups. Start with faluda. You've probably seen it modernized in a fancy cafe, but in ancient Persia, it was something almost sacred. Vermicelli noodles made of starch, soaked in rosewater, lime juice, and sometimes a dash of ground pistachio, all served nearly frozen. You're spooning into it now, in your mind, and every bite hits with a fragrant cold that melts away the dust of the day. The ice? It came from those deep storage domes, crushed down, packed around bowls, or mixed directly into drinks. In fact, there was an entire profession built around delivering it. Imagine the Persian iceman, walking with a yoke over his shoulders, 2 buckets swinging, beads of water dripping down the sides, kids running alongside him, hoping for a chip of ice like it's candy. And here's a quirky tidbit. Certain households paid extra to have ice delivered in the early morning so they could chill their yogurt before breakfast. Not necessary, strictly speaking, but it made the meal feel special, comforting. It's proof that even in ancient empires, people knew how to treat themselves. You keep walking, and in the distance, there's a market. Hear it? Bells clinking, sellers calling. And at one dusty stall sits a woman pouring sharbat, Persian fruit syrup diluted with water and poured over ice. She's using an earthen jug that's been buried overnight to keep it cool. Customers sip slowly, the chill mixing with the sweet in a way that's nothing short of miraculous. Historians still argue whether these syrups were purely culinary or had medicinal roles as well. Some ancient texts suggest certain flavors, like tamarind or sour cherry, were believed to restore balance to the humors. Others dismiss it as wishful thinking, a kind of placebo with great marketing. Either way, no one complains when the cup is this cold and the sun is this high, and you're starting to realize this wasn't a luxury for the elite, at least not always. The Persians had a remarkable way of making innovation scale. Sure, the kings had private ice reserves, probably guarded and locked and attended by scribes with tally scrolls. But smaller yakhchals served communities. Guilds may have shared cooling rights. Temples sometimes managed ice stores as a kind of public good. Imagine being a traveler then, dusty from the road, weary from days under an unkind sun, and reaching a small oasis town. You're offered water, yes, but also a bowl of chilled fruit or a cup of icy syrup. It's not just hospitality, it's survival disguised as kindness. Now, one more thread to pull. The cultural symbolism of cold in a hot land. In Persia, coolness wasn't just comfort, it was refinement. Ice became a metaphor in poetry. The beloved's touch, cooler than the snows of Damavand. A sharp retort, as biting as mountain frost. Entire metaphors chilled themselves in the language. And food played along. Some dishes were served lukewarm by design, to make the contrast with cold drinks more profound. Others used frozen elements purely for shock value. Think about that, a culture that reveled in the heat, learning how to surprise its own palate with cold. That's not just culinary flair, it's psychological genius. Here's another fringe detail. Some old Persian ice recipes were written on scrolls stored in private libraries, passed down through generations like heirlooms. A recipe for icy pomegranate sherbet could sit beside a family's land deeds and poetry, because preserving joy, that mattered too. You duck into another courtyard, shadowed and serene. A stone bowl rests on a pedestal, its inside slick with the faint stain of berries. Someone made dessert here once, maybe last century, maybe last week. You imagine them, barefoot, humming as they stir syrup and fold it with shaved ice. The bowl gets heavier, the air cooler, and just before they serve it, they taste a spoonful, smile, then call the children in. This was life. This was a celebration. There's something quietly rebellious about it too. To freeze something in a desert is to defy expectation. It says, we refuse to be ruled by heat alone. And that's a kind of freedom worth protecting. You settle onto a shaded bench. The breeze carries a trace of mint and lime, though it might just be memory playing tricks. You've walked so long, heard so many voices, seen so much ingenuity carved out of dirt and fire and heat. And also, someone, somewhere, could taste something cold on a summer afternoon. That's where you leave this section, sitting in the still air of an ancient courtyard, a spoonful of ice melting on your tongue, and a world of history humming gently under your feet. You lean back further into the bench's curve, eyes half closed. The courtyard is still, shaded, yet somewhere beyond its walls, a breeze stirs. You imagine it rustling fig leaves, gliding over cracked clay tiles, passing slowly through alleys where time folds in on itself. Because even here, even after all this, the story of Persia's icy brilliance continues to unfurl. Now it's time to leave the city behind. You're walking away from the domes and the bustling stalls, from the shadow of empires and fragrant kitchens. Instead, you're traveling north, toward the Zagros Mountains. The sun is still sharp, but the elevation changes the air. Thinner, cleaner, cold enough at night that, yes, even snow isn't unheard of. And you're following the path of a specific idea now, the seasonal ice harvest. See, while the desert yakhchals stored winter ice into summer, mountain communities did something even more intimate. They collected snow from the high slopes by hand and packed it into blocks. These were then hauled down, wrapped in layers of straw or wool, and stored in mountainside caves or artificial pits. It's a concept that feels medieval, almost monastic, but it persisted far longer than you'd think. Even well into the 19th century, villagers in remote parts of Iran were cutting and storing snow like their ancestors had centuries before. No engines, no refrigeration, just gravity, labor, and an unshakable relationship with cold. You trudge up one of those old goat paths now, watch your footing, toward a hollow in the rock. Inside it smells like damp stone and frozen earth. You brush aside the straw and sure enough, there's a seam of ice, smooth, blue-tinted, preserved not by luck, but by an understanding of airflow and insulation passed down orally for generations. There's a scholarly debate about just how widespread these mountain ice practices were. Some argue they were restricted to a few highland regions. Others claim they fed entire networks of summer markets. The records are patchy, parchment doesn't always last, and oral tradition tends to blur like fog, but the legacy endures. And here's a delightful fringe detail. Some remote mountain communities held summer festivals that began with the ceremonial first cutting of the ice pit. Children sang, elders gave thanks. Then came cold treats served in wooden bowls or banana leaves. It wasn't just about preservation. It was a celebration, ritual made of snowflakes. You descend now, back to the foothills. Your legs ache slightly, but it's that good kind of tired, the kind that makes the idea of something cold against your lips feel sacred. Down below you see them, donkeys saddled with bundles making their way towards small towns. Each load has been packed carefully, wrapped to delay the melt. The journey is slow, deliberate, and in a way timeless. These ice caravans weren't fast, but they didn't need to be. They were reliable. That was enough. Imagine the anticipation as a caravan approaches. Children waiting by the road, eyes wide. Shopkeepers are prepping their clay jugs. Women gathered in the shade, whispering about who would buy what and how they'd stretch the ice to last the week. In those moments, time slows. Life becomes about something as simple and as extraordinary as cold. One story from the 1700s speaks of a village so dependent on its summer ice supply that they paid a local mystic to bless each delivery, believing it would slow the melting. Historians are split on whether this was a genuine belief or a bit of playful community theater. But either way, it tells you something. Ice wasn't just a material, it had meaning. And speaking of meanings, have you noticed how often cold gets tied to purity in Persian thought? A cold drink isn't just refreshing, it's morally clean, holy, fit for offering to guests, to saints, even to the dead during funeral rites. That's not just practical, it's philosophical. A way of understanding the world through temperature. Here's another odd detail. Persian poets often described ideal lovers as cold-hearted, but in a good way. It wasn't cruelty, but composure, restraint. A lover who offered coolness in a world of burning passion. Cold was balance, and in many ways, ice storage mirrored that ideal. Controlled, measured, a discipline made physical. Back in town now, you're walking past the remains of an old cellar. The walls are stained darker near the floor, a sign that water used to gather here, probably from melted ice. Maybe it was a merchant's stash, hidden from rivals. Maybe it was a communal reserve. Either way, the silence of the space holds memory. You pause, listen. The walls don't speak, but the cool in the air seems to sigh, and it hits you. This isn't just about preserving temperature, it's about preserving dignity, comfort, the kind of thing that makes you feel human, even when the world around you is bone dry and bleached with sun. You pass a basin carved into stone, maybe a trough once used to temper newly delivered snow. Nearby sits a fragment of ceramic etched with a floral motif. A bowl for Faludi? Maybe, maybe not. But your mind paints the scene anyway. Someone squatting nearby, spooning cold dessert, laughing. So much effort for a fleeting thing. Ice melts, drinks empty. But the memory, the story, it lingers. And just like that, you're brought back to the present. You're lying there in your own room, your own world. But your breath slows. Your thoughts are cool. Because now you know, somewhere in the past, someone fought the sun just to make dessert feel magical. And in doing so, they gave us this dream. You shift gently in your blanket, the imaginary dust of ancient paths still clinging to your thoughts. The soft creak of a wooden cartwheel echoes faintly as you picture it. A caravan returning through sun-bleached hills, its icy cargo mostly intact. Your journey continues, not just through geography now, but through the timeline of ingenuity. You're walking through a marketplace in the 19th century, somewhere between Yazd and Shiraz. The architecture's changed a little, more Western influences creeping in, a few glass windows here and there, but the yakhchal still stands. It leans slightly, a dignified relic, its mud brick flanks pockmarked with time, and you notice something strange. The ice trade isn't just surviving, it's thriving, at least for now. Persian merchants, ever adaptable, have found ways to keep ice relevant in a rapidly changing world. Trains are still a dream in these hills, and refrigeration hasn't arrived yet. So the old ways still work. You stop at a vendor's stall. She's selling sherbet. No, not the rainbow powder stuff. This is a traditional Persian drink, made from fruit juice, rose water, and snow. It's tart, floral, and cold enough to make your teeth tingle. She spoons it into a cup made of beaten tin, hands it to you with a knowing look. You sip. Bliss. That delicate balance of sweet and frost and centuries of knowledge. A child tugs at her skirts. "Is this really ice?" he asks, suspicious. She nods, smiling. "From the mountains, same as always." Here's the mainstream fact. Persia's ice economy was so resilient that even European travelers marveled at it. One British officer in the 1800s wrote with astonishment about villages in full summer heat where drinks were chilled as if by magic. He didn't realize the magic was centuries of trial, error, and dry air manipulation. And that's the thing, this wasn't some static tradition. The methods evolved. Yakhchals were sometimes modified to store other perishables, dried fruits, nuts, even important scrolls in extreme cases. You spot one merchant using an abandoned ice pit as a wine cellar. It's cool, dark, and surprisingly aromatic. You round a corner and stumble across a workshop. Not brick and mortar this time. Fabric tents shading a group of young men shaping ice with wooden tools. But it's not for drinks or desserts. These blocks are being used in a hospital. That's right, ice for medicine. Historians still argue whether these medical uses were widespread or merely regional. Some documents suggest entire summer wards were designed with ice-based cooling systems in mind. Others insist it was all anecdotal, elite physicians experimenting with what they had. But either way, the idea of using natural refrigeration to lower fevers or ease swelling, not bad for a civilization that hadn't yet plugged anything into a wall. Oh, and a fringe detail for you. Some Persian folk remedies called for placing ice chips under the tongue of someone suffering heat stroke, not just for cooling, but to shock the soul back into balance. Is it scientific? Not exactly. But did people swear by it? Absolutely. You continue down the road, and now the heat is thicker. You can feel it pressing into your shoulders like a warm hand. But you've entered the twilight of the old ice era. The first signs are there. Rumors of machines that can make cold air on command. The word refrigerator is making its way into elite circles, mostly in French. It sounds alien, futuristic. People scoff. Nothing can replace the mountains, they say. And for a while, they're right. But the writing is on the wall. Some yakhchals are being dismantled, their bricks repurposed for houses. Others stand, but neglected, weeds growing at their base. You pass one that's become a home for goats. The doorframe has been chewed, and inside the air is no longer cool. Still, some persist. One family you meet has kept their ice practice alive simply because it's tied to their honor. "My grandfather cut ice. His grandfather before him. Why should I stop now?" the man asks, eyes defiant. And you wonder, how many technologies have faded not because they were flawed, but because they didn't fit the new tempo of modern life? A dog barks in the distance. You glance upward. The sun has begun to dip, casting long shadows across the adobe walls. And the irony hits you. This civilization mastered the art of preserving cold, and yet couldn't stop the melt of time. But before you grow too melancholic, let's lighten things with this quirky tidbit. In one part of northern Iran, a local ice merchant became a minor legend for sculpting small ice animals as a side business. Kids would trade figs for miniature donkeys made of snow. The tradition only lasted a generation, but it makes you smile. By the end of the 19th century, electric refrigeration begins creeping in. First in colonial outposts, then in upper-class urban homes. It's slow, but steady. Ice becomes less about ingenuity and more about plugging in and forgetting. The ancient yakhchals become dusty landmarks, cool in spirit perhaps, but no longer in temperature. And yet, you walk back to one, just for a moment. You step inside. It's empty. The floor is dry, but the temperature still drops. Just a little. Enough to make your skin prickle. You sit, and it's there, in that silence, that you feel the echo. Cold, it seems, is more than a sensation. It's a memory, a method, a miracle made out of mud and logic and love of comfort. The light is fading now, and you find yourself in the 20th century, where the modern world hums gently around you. You're still walking, but the scenery's changed. Gone are the adobe structures and camel trains. In their place, apartment blocks, neon signs, the steady buzz of traffic. The air still carries a dry warmth, but now it's punctuated by the chill of refrigerated shops and the faint hum of air conditioning. You duck into a cafe, not because you're thirsty, but because there's a pull, something familiar. Behind the counter, the young barista is serving Bastani Sonati, that same Persian saffron and pistachio ice cream you first tasted nearly 1,000 years ago in the caravanserai. It's still frozen, still delicious, but now it's kept cold by coils, fans, and freon. You sit down, and that's when it hits you. The yakhchals are mostly gone, bulldozed, ignored, or simply melted into memory. And yet, their shadow remains. The modern refrigerators and walk-in freezers, the ones humming behind this cafe, owe their quiet existence to principles refined long before thermodynamics got fancy. Insulation, evaporative cooling, the wisdom of shade and wind. You remember standing inside one of those mud brick domes, feeling the world soften into stillness. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 1975, a group of Iranian architects began studying yakhchals again, this time as sustainable cooling alternatives. They marveled at their energy efficiency, even by modern standards. Some experimental designs have since tried to replicate them using eco-friendly materials. And there's a quirky twist. One postmodern artist in Tehran installed a glass yakhchal sculpture on a rooftop, watching it melt slowly in protest of climate change. The idea? To make people remember what cool once meant. Now, as for our scholarly debate, historians still argue whether the yakhchals were truly widespread in rural communities or mostly reserved for larger cities and elite households. Some accounts suggest villagers simply couldn't afford the upkeep or lacked access to ice pits. Others point to regional folk traditions, where every family had a small ice cache built into shaded rock. The truth, as usual, probably lives somewhere in between. You walk through a museum next. The Persian Heritage exhibit. In one corner there's a model yakhchal, carefully labeled, scale accurate, with a little LED light inside for drama. Kids walk by without much interest. But you stand a while longer. I imagine it is full of snow. Ice blocks are packed like treasure, centuries of secrets entombed in frost. Funny thing, you've just spent 2 hours wandering through ancient refrigeration, and you've barely broken a sweat. That's the brilliance of the story. It's calm, it's steady, it's, well, cool. And now, one last glimpse before you go. You're back outside, walking beneath the stars. They're sharp tonight. Desert nights always are. The sky feels infinite, and yet you know there's something just beneath your feet. Maybe it's a forgotten chamber, maybe just dry earth. But in your mind, it's a yakhchal, ancient and undisturbed, still holding a sliver of ice deep within. You pause. Because even as the world spins faster and brighter and hotter, there's comfort in knowing that once upon a time, someone looked at the scorching sun and said, "We'll make ice anyway." And they did. And so you drift through these final thoughts, letting your breath slow, letting the heat fade. No fans needed, no noise, just the memory of mud domes, icy desserts, and the soft rustle of palm fronds swaying in the wind. The world around you grows quieter now. Even the hum of distant roads seems muffled, as if the night itself is leaning in to listen. Your body, once tense from the journey, begins to soften, limbs loosening, eyes fluttering in that half-sleep space between now and not quite yet. Your mind, still dancing with images of ancient Persia, starts to slow its pace. Those towering mud domes now stand gently in your thoughts, not as marvels of architecture, but as still, grounding shapes, the kind of thing you can lean your mind against, the kind of memory that stays cool long after the fire has burned out. You picture the interior again, dark, quiet, perfectly still. You imagine lying down on that chilled floor, the earth beneath you keeping its promise to stay calm. No matter how bright the world above gets, you feel it. That first breath of cold air after stepping inside. The kind of breath that sinks deep into your chest and says, "You're safe. You're here." And so, let your breath follow. Slow, steady, like snow melting in the morning sun. Let the flickers of heat in your thoughts dissolve into frost-tipped silence. Let your limbs grow heavier, your heartbeat quieter. You've walked through 1,000 years of history tonight, not in haste, but in reverence. Now there's nowhere else to be, no steps left to take, just this moment and the soft hush of stories settling. Sleep comes easily now.